Okay, so I'm here to explain what happens when Jupiter goes into our seventh house. And let's start by explaining what the seventh house is. The seventh house can represent, short and simple, our spouse. It shows us and maybe a committed, serious one-on-one relationship. It can represent close, intimate relationships and close friendships in general. See, the third house and the 11th house, they might represent friendships, but the seventh house, that would more so represent like a real serious, close relationship, a real serious, close friendship. Someone that you really, vented to and told away some personal secrets to and whatnot. That's more so the seventh house, a close, intimate, one-on-one relationship. Business dealings can be seen from the seventh house because the seventh house also represents marriage. Marriage is like a business. Marriage is a contract. When you split with someone with a marriage, people are entitled to money and property. So business dealings, how you might go about handling, conducting business with someone, can be seen in the seventh house. The seventh house can represent large forms of transportation. It can represent boats and airplanes. Why? Because the fourth house represents vehicles like cars and motorcycles and bikes. And four places from the fourth house is the seventh. 4, 5, 6, 7. So therefore, the fourth from the fourth house becomes the higher version of it. So therefore, it's larger vehicles such as boats and airplanes and trains. Those are the type of vehicles that represents the seventh house. So the fourth house can represent your home, but the seventh house might represent a mansion, or the seventh house might represent a home away from home, which is sort of like your partner, but that's real deep, and I'll probably say that for a whole nother video. But what's Jupiter? Jupiter represents divine knowledge, wisdom, our belief systems, esoteric knowledge, philosophical knowledge, religion, astrology, tarot, mysticism. A good Jupiter, a good well-placed Jupiter can make you very good at pursuing and learning and teaching astrology and mysticism and tarot and whatnot. So, what happens when Jupiter goes to the seventh house? You might think this is an awesome placement. It can be, but my take on it's going to be different. It's not going to be so hunky-dory, but it's the truth. So, if you look at the first video, Jupiter in the first house, you would know that Jupiter gains directional strength in the first house, which means this is an area where Jupiter is very strong and feels very good at and excels very much so at. Directional strength is a Vedic sidereal astrological term. And Jupiter loses directional strength in the seventh house because it's the opposite. See, Jupiter is a very selfish planet, which is why Jupiter does very good in the first house. Because the first house represents your personality. The first house represents yourself. It represents your ego, in a sense. Jupiter is a very selfish planet. Egotistical planet. And now, this selfish, egotistical planet is going into the seventh house. And keep in mind, Jupiter in its essence is a guru. It's this divine spiritual teacher. Or maybe in a more relatable sense that y'all might be able to more understand, possibly. Think of Jupiter as like this Muslim. Or this pastor, this preacher. They're so heavily divine and in touch with God that they take those religious belief systems and they bring it into the marriage. It's like, no, I don't eat this, so you can't eat this either. So Jupiter in the seventh house can make you attract a very, I don't know, I want to say a strict partner, but I'll come up with a better way to explain it as I continue freestyling this. So when Jupiter comes into the seventh house, you can attract a partner that who they might use their wisdom, they might use their intellect, they might use their knowledge and use it to chastise you. Whether they know it or not, they can use their wisdom and knowledge to maybe control you and chastise you. Like, for example, they might have read a million books or whatever, and they might look at you and be like, you might do something, and they might say, well, maybe if you did this, or maybe if you did that, or you should do this, you should meditate, or you should read this book, or maybe you should just change the way you think. I don't know, they might insert some wisdom and knowledge and advice to you when they see that you're doing something that might be, I don't know, that they might think that they can fix. And it might not be a problem and annoying at first, but eventually over time it might snowball. It might get bigger and more annoying, and they might not have no ill intention. Like, look, babe, I know that you're spiritual. I know that you're holy. I know that you're smart. I know you went to college, but you're getting on my nerves. You're pissing me off. I'm not your disciple. I'm not your student. I'm not your classmate. I'm your wife. I'm your boyfriend or whatever. Let's just have a normal conversation. Or stop nitpicking me. Or stop enforcing your belief systems on me. And, you know, that might ruin a marriage. That might ruin a relationship. You know, you can probably, like I said, you could possibly attract a smart, intellectual partner who can use their wisdom and use their knowledge on you in a negative sense, either knowingly or unknowingly. You know, they can just make you probably possibly feel intellectually inferior to them, whether they know it or not. You know, like I said, you might be dating someone who's very spiritual or very religious and or just very knowledgeable, and you might not be this super religious and super spiritual and super knowledgeable, and they might implement and try to bring their knowledge and advice and skills and put them on you, and you might get tired of that after a while. It's like, look, I know what I've got into when I married you or started dating you, but don't try to change me. That person might try to change you by enforcing their knowledge, by enforcing their wisdom, by enforcing their belief systems on you. And you might go with the flow or you might break apart from it, you know? In Vedic, Hindu, Indian, whatever astrology, mythologically wise, Jupiter, he sort of lost his wife in mythology. He lost his wife because, I believe, don't quote me entirely, but he lost his wife because he was too busy, caught up in his work, caught up in his rituals, caught up in his spiritual routines, caught up in taking care of and tending to other people. So, you know, a Jupiterian, someone who has Jupiter in the 7th house, they can attract a spouse or settle down with a spouse who could likely get too caught up in their reading, get too caught up in education, get too caught up in their profession, and that could possibly damage the relationship, you know? Well, like I said, they can just use that wisdom, use that knowledge, and use it on you, use it to try to change you, use it to try to benefit you. They can have great intentions, but you might get real tired of this person keep suggesting something to you, keep trying to, you know, do something to fix you or help you in a sense, making you feel, even though they might not intend to, lesser than what you are. Like, for example, you might be a girl, and then, you know, you might have had a horrible day at work. You might have had a horrible day at work, got into an argument with your parents or siblings, and you're just crying and breaking down, and, you know, your Jupiter and 7th house partner, because the 7th house represents your partner, your partner could be like, you know, well, maybe you meditated more, maybe you read this book, maybe you stilled your mind, maybe you wouldn't feel so unbalanced, maybe you wouldn't feel so uneased. And you're not trying to hear that. You're not trying to hear that crap. You're like, look, goddammit, I'm crying. I want you to comfort me. I want you to hug me. I want you to hold me. I want you to kiss me. Buy me some food. I don't want you to start quoting verses out the Bible to make me feel better. You know, they can implement that wisdom, maybe too much, and bring it into the relationship, bring it into the marriage, possibly. I'll give you another example, like Muhammad Ali. His first marriage, or maybe several of his marriages or relationships, they didn't really last because aside from his cheating, um, he would enforce his Muslim belief systems onto his women. And if they didn't conform and go with it, well, then the marriage would suffer. So this person with Jupiter in 7th house, they can attract a partner or settle down with a partner who's maybe college and learning and whatever they might be heavily into, or whatever they might heavily believe into, that might affect the relationship. That might affect the marriage. You can get a good partner, but you'll just have to be wary and cautious of the things that I just said. On a positive side, you'll get a well-rounded intellectual partner. They'll be good. They'll be a good-natured person. They'll have good intentions because Jupiter is a very optimistic planet. It's a benefit planet. But here we see that too much of a good thing can ruin. Too much of something good can be bad. Too much of a good thing can ruin a good thing. You know, the Jupiterian in the 7th house person, their partner would just have to understand that, look, I know that you're into this spiritual stuff, this religious stuff, or you're a very well educated person, but you know, when we're together, let's sort of just leave that outside. You know, let's have a regular conversation. Let's have a normal conversation. So unless you yourself or someone who's very intellectual, maybe very deep, maybe very well rounded, and can match your partner, well then Jupiter in the 7th house is probably a good placement. But Jupiter in the 7th house is an okay placement. Now, the native that has Jupiter in the 7th house, you yourself, you could likely be prone to possibly a lot of sexual encounters, or maybe could have a hard time settling and sticking down with one partner, because Jupiter is a planet of expansion and it rules the 9th house of long distance travel. So I don't know, you could just explore your options and whatnot. You know, you see Jupiter in itself, it rules the 9th house of long distance travel, which represents like travel throughout the whole country. And it rules the 12th house of foreign lands, which is going to another country. So ultimately, Jupiter is here to be of service to the world, to be of service to multiple people, not to just one person. So therefore, Jupiter in a sense isn't really the best planet for like marriage, for like a relationship, for like that's just the truth. That's just the fact. You know, Jupiter. Of course, if someone with Jupiter in 7th house, they can get married, they can get into a relationship, but all the things that I just said can very well be present. It's like, okay, you can get into the relationship, but these are the things that you'll have to deal with. Because like I said, Jupiter is very strong and gains its directional strength in the 1st house, which represents yourself, which represents your ego, and the 7th house represents partnerships. You cannot bring your ego into relationships, into partnerships, into dealings. You know, Jupiter can be this very optimistic, high and mighty planet, which is why it does very good in fire signs. And Jupiter can be so optimistic and so high and mighty that it can become ignorant to other people. It can become ignorant and oblivious to what other people got to say, into their suffering. So Jupiter, like I said, you're going to attract a partner and a spouse. They have the best intentions, but they can still, I don't know, use their wisdom, use their knowledge in a way that can possibly make you feel inferior, or make you feel lower than them, or just get on your nerves, and you'll bring it up to them, and they probably won't understand it. They probably won't be able to see it, and then that might ruin their relationship. Unless you're yourself, or someone who's very intellectual and very well-rounded and educated, and you know, you sort of like on that same intellectual level as your partner, then y'all might be able to clash and maybe balance things out. But you can get into a relationship. You can attract a good-natured partner with Jupiter in the 7th house. But you might have to face and deal with all those things that I just said in regards to your partner. And that's it. That's all I gotta say of Jupiter in the seventh house. Hope you enjoyed this video and see you next time.